for the homeless. So the private community, the private sector, especially those with big stores downtown like Columbia Sportswear, are trying to make efforts to resolve it. But if one city could resolve it, all cities could,
Right.
but no city can. So there does not seem to be a universal solution.
I'm sure it's just a whole series of solutions. We just have to, as a society, decide that it's important to make sure everybody has housing, at least a minimum kind of housing.
Yeah.
And then there's all kinds of mental health issues involved in that, which, oh God, we could do hours and
Exactly
hours
right.
another show about it, right?
Yeah. On Thursdays, I feed under the bridge with my church, and there are people who don't who are happy living on the street. They don't want that responsibility of making their bed every day, and they're quite content with their lives, and whether they're content naturally or whether they're content because of um, emotional, mental, psychological reasons, they would never go into a little house or a converted facility anyway. So we're always going to have some of that, I think.
Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, it's just everything's gotten worse. I decided to start actually doing some volunteering work, making the time for it. And I'm volunteering at a food, not a food kitchen, because we box up food and give food away.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't I think of the word? Yeah.
Food distribution.
Yeah, food distribution near the shop. So it's actually very.
And people come pick up their box lunches.
Yeah.
Or do you go out into the street and distribute them?
No, they come there and once a week. So it's a pantry where they can stock up
right.
And
right.
Yeah, it's I never really.
Well, they do pretty good here in Portland.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
The Episcopals do it on Monday, and the Lutherans do it on Tuesday, and the Catholics do it on Wednesday, and somebody's out there serving lunch almost every day of the week.
Well, that's a good.
So it helps somewhat.
Yeah, of course.
And I don't think, and we probably haven't even seen the depths of poverty to come out of the last year. I mean, there are so many people who've just picked up their kids, moved out of school. Tonight, I'm finally going to watch that movie Nomadland.
Yeah.
And try and get a better feel for what's going on in America. People living out of their cars.
Yeah.
By choice.
I saw it. It'll be interesting to hear your take.
Did you see the movie?
I did. Yeah.
I probably wouldn't be watching it if it hadn't won the best picture award, but I guess we have a cultural responsibility.
Yeah. So yeah, it was for a movie. It was a good movie. Yes, and it. Yeah.
Alan, are you with us there? Alan, are you in the background? Alan, where's Richard? Is someone in contact with Richard, Alan? Let me send him a quick text. Do you know Richard Morey from New Hampshire?
No.
Jen?
I don't. I don't think I do. But, sometimes you meet people at book fairs and you don't realize you know them.
How do you travel to many book fairs outside of your geography?
Yes. We don't we'll shop them sometimes we'll do them, but I've gone to the New York Book Fair, the ABA New York Book Fair, Boston Fair. We've done the Chicago Fair. We go do the RBMS showcase every year, no matter where it is.
RBMS, Rocky.
I know it's the rare
book school.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we've done the London Fair.
Yeah.
So, and we're registered for the New York Fair this year.
Very good. Well, we've got a question coming up later in the show. What is the oldest book fair? Do you know the answer to that question?
The oldest book fair in the.
Don't say it out loud if you
United
do.
States, in the world.
In the world. No, in the world. What city has the longevity of holding the oldest book fair? All right, we're going to give the answer later on the show, Jen.
Okay. I have some ideas, but I don't know for sure. Can I Google it?
You can now. Sure.
Yeah.
I do. I carry my brain with me wherever I go now.
Right. What does Siri say?
And it's so funny how I do anyways, find myself Googling the slightest, most insignificant thing just to give myself the sheer joy of thinking that I've become knowledge empowered.
Yeah. I think we all do. Yes. I've been working through the last on a professional level, working through some old paper the last couple of months that was owned 20 years ago by another ABA member woman, but she was more like an autograph dealer.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had partially cataloged some things, but from the perspective of an autograph. And
Mm-hmm.
there are like lots of old letters, but like you can see her notes where she had to go back to like go visit libraries and other things, and she could only get part of the story, and some of the times it wasn't correct. So it's been interesting.
I love picking up new collections. It's just so knowledgeable. I mean, I just got one this past week on botany. I know nothing about botany and plants, but just to flip through the books and it's so rewarding, isn't it?
It is. I love learning every day. So
it's like getting a mini master's degree every time you pick up a new collection.
Yes, but then I promptly forget everything. So,
Well.
So it'll be no good on Jeopardy. Brad remembers everything. Like, he's so good at it. I'm not. I'm horrible.
Well, there's no incentive to anymore since we got this guy around.
Yeah.
But that's how I was in college too. Once the final exam came, flush. On to the next semester.
Yes, I need to expand the storage capacity up here. That would be nice.
And speaking of storage capacity, where do you keep your books? Is everything in your home, or do you have a home store, home store locker unit?
No, we have a shop, a bricks and mortar store. So.
And you've got it all in there.
Yep.
Good.
I mean, we try not to take things home, but I do all the time. So. You know. Like, oh, well, this looks interesting.
For a while there, when I was working out of my home, I had everything in boxes in a storage facility. What a pain that was.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It's
every time I sold a book, I'd have to move 3,000 pounds to find it.
Yeah, no, I haven't had to do that. But our shop has been actually, we just celebrated this year our 40th anniversary of the shop. So
no way. You can't be the original owner.
No. No. Yeah.
Well, good morning, Jen. I'm not sure where Richard is, but welcome to the Rare Book Cafe, the book lovers' rendezvous, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. The Rare Book Cafe is the only weekly live stream program on the internet devoted entirely to rare and collectible books and the people who love them, and that's YOU. Good morning, everybody. It's 12:30 on the Eastern Coast, where our esteemed executive producer, Alan Smith, is running the widgets behind the scene. It's 9:30, where Jen and I are on Pacific Daylight Time. Hi, Jen. Hi. And 5:30 Greenwich Mean Time for all of those of you signing in from the European and African side of the globe. We are streaming live on YouTube and Facebook every Saturday, and we are now also available in a podcast on your favorite podcast platform, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever great podcasts are found for free. We're a virtual cafe, accessible anywhere in the world, anytime in the world, and everyone is welcome, and we're here for the love of books. At least everybody who signed in so far is.
Right.
With me today is our special guest, Jen Johnson, who joined us a few weeks ago to talk about the West Coast book fair and organizer annually of Rare Books LA. And recently, Jen ran the virtual book fair, Western States Virtual Book Fair. And Richard Morey, not sure where Richard is. He may be here momentarily. Richard is organizing in the first weekend of June what may be the first live traditional book fair to return since the pandemic began. Jen, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good.
Nice.
So, Jen, we had you on a couple weeks ago. How'd the show go?
The show went great. Yeah, I mean, it was wonderful. We had higher sales than we did our first time around because we did more. This is our second virtual book fair that we've produced.
40s
and
50s.
then we have.
I don't know what he wanted to pay. I didn't ask him.
So we had about $324,000 in sales, 486 items sold, and
2,000 of those dollars and 2 of those items were mine. I said $2,000 and 2 items were mine.
Good. And we had about 4,800 people shopping the book fair, which if we had that many people shopping an in-person book fair, I think we would have lost our minds. So, and
is that right? Well, how many visitors do you normally have to a live book fair? How did those numbers compare?
When we have a live book fair, when we do our fall show at the Proud Bird, which is in October, we tend to see over 3 days about 1,500 people. And then when we did we've only done one show at the Pasadena Convention Center for Rare Books LA, and we had a little over 2,000 people over the course of 2 days.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, and that's we felt like that was a healthy crowd. We also had a great, we experimented this for the first time, I think, in a virtual book fair. We actually hosted a fundraising booth. And so there were 18 items in that fundraising booth, and the money went to CABS, or it's called ABS now, the Rare Book School that's held, or what's called the Colorado Antiquarian Book Seminar that's now in Minnesota, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so the items in that booth were donated, and 11 of the 18 sold. So we sold, we raised over $2,000 in scholarship money from that booth. So
very nice. Yeah, I have to tell you, I attended the CABS in 2016, and it was probably the best education I had post collegiate education I had anywhere in any of my career. It was great. Hey, I see that Richard has joined us. Richard, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Are you hearing me?
Oh, yes, you are. I'm hearing you great. Well,
Great.
Let me remind our listeners before they get going that Jen, Richard, and I are live, and we're here every week. But some of our segments later in the show will be pre-recorded. This is not an attempt to trick anybody or get you to believe something that isn't true, but everybody can't be here every week. Among our pre-recorded guests this week will be David Hess of the Bookman Bookstore in Orange, California, with his popular feature, Things Found in Old Books. Also, Lee Lynn couldn't be here today, but she'll be checking in via video with a special feature on collecting the outsider arts. But our associate producer, Lynn Thompson, is with us today with the story behind the story. And that's all going to come a little bit later in the show. But right now, we're going to talk about a return to normalcy. Cross my fingers, cross your fingers. We all hope this is a return to normalcy. Right. For more than a year now, the nation, the world has been locked down in this corona pandemic with very, very sad for almost every person, every family has experienced some sort of distress throughout of this. And it's certainly upended our lives and turned some of us into hermits and some of us into couch potatoes and turned almost all of us into even bigger book readers. But the good news is many people are reading more books than before. I know that 2020 was a great book selling year for myself and many of my peers. Back in 1920, in the aftermath of World War I, Warren G. Harding campaigned for a return to normalcy. Harding won the election as soldiers, and many of them farm boys returned from the war. The new worry was whether these young men would be satisfied with returning to the farm after their experiences in far off Europe and in Paris and ooh la la. All of that was expressed in this popular song, How You Gonna Keep Them Down on the Farm?
Did you want me to sing it for you, Ed?
Hum along, Richard, hum along.
we could do it in 3 parts here.
Reuben, I've been thinking, said his wifey dear. Now that all is peaceful and calm, boys will soon be back on the farm. Mr. Reuben started winking, slowly rubbed his chin. He pulled his chair up close to Mother.
Well, you're waiting for this to come. I assume you're waiting for this to come up, Ed. Is that what we're waiting for?
How you gonna keep
So while you're waiting,
finish the tune and we'll be right back.
After they
okay.
Are you? How you gonna keep them away from Broadway, jazzing around and painting the town? How you gonna keep them away from harm? That's a mystery. Imagine Reuben when he meets his pa. He'll kiss his cheek and holler, ooh la la. How you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? Tell me, Mother, how you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? And how you gonna keep them away from rectors, jazzing around and painting the town? Woo! How you gonna keep them away from harm? That's a mystery. They'll never want to see a rake or plow. And who the heck can parley-vous a cow? How you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris?
Lovely.
Woohoo! All right, Jen and Richard, you ready for some normalcy?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Richard, you are going to have the first live in-person book fair after the at least 1 year hiatus. Tell us about it. When's it coming up, and how are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling good. The fair is called the Northern New England Book Show or Book Fair in Concord, New Hampshire, June 4th and 5th. I mean, 5th and 6th. Somebody confused me yesterday. So June 5th and 6th. And we're this is our 45th year, I think, for this fair. It's had multiple owners over the years, but it's been around a long time and is a great tradition in Concord. We're real excited. We're going to have a good selection of dealers, probably about at least the same as last year, or the last time, I should say. I keep forgetting. And we've added some postcard dealers to the event this year, which we haven't had in the past.
Good, good. Now, Jen, when you were with us a couple of weeks ago talking about the Western States Virtual Book Fair, you were really high on, very excited about your educational sessions that went along with that. How did those turn out? And then, Richard, I understand that you've got a few as well.
Well, I have
Jen?
a twist, yes.
You have a twist. Jen, you go first.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we hosted 7. We had 7 different educational sessions. One of them was actually kind of not well generally advertised because it was just for librarians. And we had the one that had the most was one we called Candid Conversations with Occultists. We had 118 people show up.
Oh, my.
Yeah, which was great. And the thing is that these help bring people back to the show. So when we're in this virtual environment, it's like hard to keep drawing people back in. And so I think it was really successful. On the second day, we had things really, really focused on like the book collecting consumer audience with a session about Lovecraft Country, and then also a talk about this podcast called You Must Remember This, and she really highlights the collections in special collections, and she has she talks about the history of Hollywood. It was really, really, really interesting. And I helped bring people back to the fair, and we saw little bumps in the visitors after we had each of these sessions, which was the important part.
Good. I attended the one with George Miles and Nick Aratakis, and I found it very stimulating. George is quite articulate. Boy, he's been the Western librarian at Yale University since 1990, did he say, for 30 years? That's impressive. What a career.
Yes. And it was so great. Just you felt like you were kind of peeking in on just a conversation that they were having. And I think Nick helped to draw out some insights from George that were really smart. And it was great to listen in.
Yeah. So, Richard, what are the twists that you're going to have at your live fair with respect to educating the public?
Well, we're going to bring back to life a man by the name of Benjamin Kilburn. You probably know what a stereo view is, and I think I can show you. Here's an example of one here in my hand. There were a stereo view, and you'd put them in a viewer, and you would see for the very first time a two-dimensional image. Well, the Kilburn brothers of Littleton, New Hampshire, were the largest producer of stereo views in the world between 1865 and 1900. And Benjamin Kilburn, who was the photographer for the company, or the first photographer, he's coming back to life, and he's going to visit us with his wife in Concord.
Very nice. Very nice. You know, funny you should mention that. Just this week, I went to an estate sale and picked up this little gem. Let me see if I could show it here. And it's some stereo cards, and they're in a lovely little case. And these happen to be of Damascus, Syria in the early part. And
they look like Underwoods.
Yeah, yeah. Jen, how did you see the content in your fair of books versus non-books, or books versus ephemera? Are you seeing a shift at these virtual fairs in the content and the material people are showing?
Oh, certainly. I think that the things that seem to be selling mostly are unique items, whether that's ephemera seems to be more scarce, or archives or letters. That seems to be the thing that sells more often than not during these virtual fairs. I think what you find is in typical just online book buying that there's plenty of books, but unless the book is unique with a unique inscription or association copy, generally speaking, you're more successful at fairs when you're selling more ephemeral items or unique items.
And how about you, Richard? Are there any ephemera-only dealers going to be at your show?
One of the biggest ephemera dealers in the country, Peter Luke, who's well known across the land, is going to be there. And there'll be others with ephemera. We have some ABAA dealers who are coming. But one of the nice, appreciated moments about New Hampshire is that we have dealers who only do the New Hampshire show and have traditionally done it. So it becomes a very good buying fair for the public and for the dealers. And of course, the dealers are happy because they're selling things. But it's always been very, very strong in terms of finding things that you don't see, because this is the only show that many of these dealers do.
Mm-hmm. Well, my team, we're actually going to be meeting in a couple weeks over Memorial Day, and we're going to pour over the results of a survey that we did of the dealers, and we're going to be looking at potentially doing a live show in October. We have some dates, but we just have to see how things are going to go in LA. We're actually really kicking the tires on how could we do a hybrid between a virtual and a live show. So that's something that we're really exploring.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, look, see the team right behind me?
Well, I'm lucky I have my team actually is my sister, so
Hi, everybody. As with many things live stream, almost anything can happen, and apparently does. We seem to have lost Ed.
oh,
I no longer see his pictures, so I think he's probably lost his connection.
we
But
can hear him.
sure,
he,
you
he,
can hear him.
We can
Oh,
still hear him though.
well, that's a good thing. I can't
Yeah.
hear him.
I can hear him just fine.
All
Richard,
right. Well, if you can hear him, and then I'll let you guys just go ahead.
okay.
Um, well, the state of New Hampshire has been one of the leading states, not the necessarily the first, but although the governor says it is. Um, but the mask requirement dropped almost a month ago in New Hampshire. And it's the rest of the New England starting to follow suit. I'm not going to necessarily tell people they have to wear a mask, but we're certainly going to encourage people to be safe and feel comfortable. Um, I expect we'll see masks on the floor, and that's fine. But I also am fairly confident that in our demographics, most of the people will have already had the vaccination shot, and that is also another factor in safety.
Well, we're trying to target with different kinds of advertising. We're doing tons of social media. The way in which we talk about antiquarian books and ephemera, we say rare books. We use exciting imagery that would appeal to younger audiences. And what we've noticed from at least the metrics we see from our virtual fairs is that the people who are shopping online at the virtual fairs are far younger than the what you see in the in-person fairs. So we have an opportunity, hopefully, to capture those people and bring them over. That's my goal.
Yeah, I actually, if you don't mind, I agree with Jen. There's a lot of young people coming not just into the business but into the market, and I've watched that, especially the last 10 years, and I've always been encouraged by that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's very exciting. I think we may have actually now lost Ed completely. So, Richard, we can talk about whatever we want
Oh, okay.
because I don't hear.
Well,
Oh no, wait, no, wait. We heard you. We heard you. I'm just kidding.
okay. So, so
Well, we have we have lost Ed completely. What we're going to do is go to a recorded segment. It's actually a segment that we were not able, also because of technical difficulties, we were not able to see last week, and that's things found in old books. And so we're going to cue that up, and then I think that I'm hopeful that Ed's problems will be able to be worked out here shortly, and we'll be able to continue this segment.
Okay.
so can we talk between us while this is going on, Jen?
Hello, this is David from the Bookman in Orange, California, welcoming you to my segment today of Things Found in Used Books. let's get started right away. I got some interesting stuff today. I want to cover it all. And we'll start off today with something that in this Anita Luce book, it's a little
You want to mute me?
little document that was apparently sent to postal customers in I believe it was 1968, because that's
Can you
when
mute
the
me, Alan?
6-cent stamp was.
Well,
Okay.
when things go wrong, all of them go wrong. So unfortunately, we have now that apparently that segment is not going to work either.
I was seeing that segment.
You were? Well, it went off. Unfortunately, it went off and it was not actually going out. But Ed Markowitz is back, and he is coming in shortly, and there he is. So you guys can continue, and then we will resume at a later time, and we'll resume some of these other things.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. And we were in the midst of talking about bringing younger people into the industry. What is it? Honey and Wax bookstore, along with Rebecca Romney, is putting a prize out there for collections by people under 30. I think whatever ideas that you come up with to try and stimulate book collecting amongst the younger generation can't go wrong.
Correct. Yeah, in the California book fairs, we host for the ABAA, the California Book Fairs hosts a California Young Book Collectors Prize as well. So that's been going on for 3 years.
What are the qualifications for that prize, Jen?
I think I can't remember what the age requirement is, but it is an age requirement. I think it's.
I wouldn't qualify.
No, sorry. Yeah, I believe it's under 30, and you have to be from California, and that's like pretty much it. Yeah.
Good. Do you remember what the last collection was? What type of things are young people collecting nowadays? Anything different than I may be aware of?
Oh, they were so creative. So the last collection that won, actually, we did it during the California Virtual Fair, and she collected publishers, the copies that you might take out to sell. So the dummy copies for selling books, but dummy copies that were used by women going door to door selling books. It was fascinating. You should have her on your show.
What's her name?
I cannot. Jessica.
Sure. Send me an email.
Yeah.
That's great. Richard, are you still with us? You look kind of motionless.
I
there.
am.
I thought I didn't mean to wake you up.
I'm in my stasis state.
So, Richard, do you have room for more dealers? I know it's only coming up in 3 or 4 weeks, but can people still sign up for a table at your show?
We do. This is a huge floor. The room for more dealers, the more the merrier. We're the show last year we had about 40 dealers. I'm certain we're going to do that again, and I'm actually hopeful with some of the issues with the pandemic and the state restrictions relaxing, we may pick up a few more.
Good.
Are you social distancing the dealers, Richard? Are you spreading out tables, or?
We're not going to have to. Initially, actually, the plan was to create some barriers between booths. But in fact, with the relaxing of the restrictions, I'm told we won't be doing that. But we will, again, this is a huge building. It's like a 25-foot high ceiling or more. It's got a wonderful airflow system. They're going to run the fans to keep the air circulating. So plus, if we want, we can open up big overhead doors and keep more fresh air coming in. It's going to be very comfortable and accommodating.
And are you requiring any proof of vaccination and or temperature?
No. In New Hampshire has a little different attitude that people are responsible for themselves.
Live free or die. It's on every license plate.
It is on every license plate. And I do think that people can be responsible. And many people have shown that by having the vaccination. Um, and those who don't have the vaccination, as the CDC is encouraging them to wear masks at this point. And I think people will do that. Um, the one thing I've noticed that people are respectful of each other. I've been doing shows this winter in Florida, and people wore masks there. I'm at Brimfield, Massachusetts right now doing an antique show, and people are wearing masks here.
I see that around town. Even just walking down the street, most of the people are still wearing masks here in Portland, even though the authorities said you don't have to outdoors anyways. And that's good. It's a good feeling to know that we're all in this together, and most people are trying to keep it healthy. So, Jen, before we let you go, I'm going to throw this out. What was, and you're only going to get one crack at the answer, because if you get it right, you're our hero. If you don't, we're going to give one of our guests a chance to answer later in the show. What is the oldest book fair in the world? Where was it held, and it's still continued to be held there today? Any ideas?
I'm going to say that it is probably something like in France, like maybe the Grand Palais show.
Very close, very close. You're within 300 miles, but that's not it. All right, to all of our listeners, hang around to the end of the show, and we're going to give you the answer to the oldest book fair in the world. And before we let you go, Richard Morey, the Northern New England Book Fair in Concord, New Hampshire, June 4th and 5th.
No, 5 and 6.
5 and 6. I was probably the one that screwed it up. June 5 and 6. Is there an admission fee for the fair, Richard?
On Saturday, there will be a $5 admission. Sunday is free.
Very good. All right. Where else can you go and have this type of invitation, this type of entertainment totally free? Thanks for joining us, folks. We look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you
very much.
All right. Good luck, Richard.
Nice to meet you, Jen.
Nice to meet you.
All right, everybody. Let me bring that question back up to you. We've been talking about book fairs today. What is the oldest book fair in the world? And you now know it's within about 300 miles of the Palais in Gay, Paris, France. I'll have an answer for you at the end of the show. But now we're going to move right along to our associate producer and often live and sometimes recorded guest, Lynn Thompson, with the story behind the story. Today, Lynn is considering Nellie Bly, not to be confused with Belly Nye. Nellie Bly was the brazen newspaper correspondent who challenged the record of Phileas Fogg, the fictional hero of Around the World in 80 Days. Good morning, Lynn.
Well, good morning from the center of nowhere, as we like to call Chester, South Carolina. It's a balmy day, and few things can pull me in from gardening on any day, but certainly the cafe is one of them. So I'm glad to be with everyone and have enjoyed watching the shows so far.
Well, you look comfortable there in that chair, Richard. Your bright red shirt.
I may just take a nap.
My middle name is Chester. I'm going to have to come out and visit you sometime.
You should. It's actually a wonderful little town. Streets full of Victorian homes. It's beginning to have its latest revival in history. It was once a terminus for 5 different railways in the 19th century, then a big agricultural county, then a big textile county, and then that played out. And so now Charlotte is getting so overcrowded, we're an attractive place to live an hour's drive away.
All things old are new again.
They are, and that's a good thing. It's a wonderful place to live, even on days when I make fun of it.
Speaking of things old, tell us about Nellie Bly.
Well, I thought it would be fun this month to talk about some authors we know by name, but know little else of. And Nellie Bly came immediately to mind. She was born this month on May 5th, 1864, outside Pittsburgh, to an Irish family. Her father achieved some prosperity in the area, acquiring the local mill and some land, And at 16, Nellie read a misogynistic article in one of the Pittsburgh papers, got her back up, and penned an indignant response under the pseudonym Lonely Orphan Girl. The paper's editor was impressed and advertised for a lonely orphan girl to contact him. Cochran did, and he offered her another placement of an article as the orphan. Then, more impressed, he offered her a job, and she started writing articles on working conditions for women and girls in the city's factories under the pseudonym Nellie Bly, because well-brought-up ladies did not write for public newspapers, at least not under their own name. She was a good reporter, and her muckraker inclinations served her well, but she was still a woman, and so she was pushed more and more into the pigeonhole of the women's page. So she got up the idea of going to Mexico as a foreign correspondent and sent home shocking articles under life under the dictator Diaz. 6 months was about as much as the government could put up with of Nellie Bly, and tipped off, she left the country just ahead of being arrested. Back in Pittsburgh and with her first book, 6 Months in Mexico, selling well, Bly got sent back to the women's page. So she quit the paper and moved to New York, where she reasoned a seasoned foreign correspondent would be welcome, even if a woman and barely 21 years old. Bly talked her way into the office of Joe Pulitzer, publisher of the New York World. Having heard awful stories of conditions in the city's mental hospital, she proposed to get herself admitted to it, and once sprung by the paper, write a series of expose articles. Pulitzer liked the idea. Bly checked into a boarding house and started acting like a crazy person. The police were called. They thought she was on drugs. Here's an image from the World showing Nellie Bly practicing how to look like a crazy person. The police hauled her to court. She appeared before a judge. She was examined, and she was found insane by several doctors. She spent nearly 2 weeks in the women's lunatic asylum on Blackwell's Island before Pulitzer intervened to obtain her release. Her subsequent articles caused a scandal. The court, the doctors, and the asylum officials all scrambled to explain how they had been so thoroughly scammed. Public outrage over conditions in the asylum led to a grand jury investigation, reforms, and a big increase in the state budget for mental health. It also led to another book from Nellie, 10 Days in a Madhouse. And notwithstanding her successes piling up one after another, she remained a woman, and there followed the usual pressure to get her back into softer topics on the women's page, like theater and music. She got bored, and in 1888 she concocted a new scheme to recreate the around-the-world journey of Phileas Fogg, the hero of Jules Verne's 1873 novel, Around the World in 80 Days, only she proposed that she would do it faster. Her editor was in favor of it, but the World's business manager, who liked the idea, while also in favor of it, couldn't help but pointing out that Nellie Bly was a woman. "It is impossible for you to do it," he told her. "You are a woman and would need a protector. Even if she could travel alone," he said, "she'd want to take too much baggage. There's no use talking about it," he insisted. "No one but a man could do this." "Very well," she said. "Start the man, and I'll start the same day for some other newspaper and beat him." Within a year, hearing rumors another paper was planning the very same stunt, the World told Bly to start packing. On her last full day in New York, she visited Gormley's, a dressmaker on Fifth Avenue, who made her iconic traveling gown. She also bought the satchel she would carry around the world. Just 7 inches tall and 16 inches wide, its size represented Bly's commitment to independence and self-reliance. According to her account, she packed 2 traveling caps, 3 veils, a pair of slippers, a complete outfit of toilet articles, inkstand, pens, pencils, and copy paper, pins, needles, and thread, a dressing gown, a tennis blazer, a small flask and drinking cup, several complete changes of underwear, a liberal supply of handkerchiefs, and fresh ruchings, which is fabric gathered along a seam to provide decoration or fullness, and most bulky and compromising of all, a jar of cold cream to keep my face from chapping in the various climates I should encounter. The world gave Bly 200 pounds of British coins and notes, just under $26,000 today, along with an unspecified amount of American currency. And in addition to this small piece of luggage and the clothes she wore, Bly brought a pair of earrings, 2 bracelets, and a gold thumb ring she wore as a good luck charm. She had worn it the day she was hired at the World, and in the days since, quote, she said, "The only 3 days that it has been absent from my finger, I've had bad luck." She may have needed the luck. She had never been at sea. She only spoke English and had recently suffered from migraines. Bly wrote her will before her departure and sent it to her mother in Pittsburgh. Nevertheless, she told reporters, "I have no qualms of fear." At 9:40 on the morning of Thursday, November 14, 1889, she left Hoboken, New Jersey on the German liner Augusta Victoria. She was just 25 years old. She was also grimly seasick for most of the trip. During the first night's dinner service, she kept having to dash out of the dining room to vomit, but she willed herself to keep going back in. Before long, the other passengers were applauding her for her pluck. She had the outline of an itinerary in mind, but not a specific plan. Circling the globe at high speed in 1889 was both an endurance sport and a high-stakes puzzle. It meant sleepless nights, hurried connections, mad dashes to meet steamers in the rain. It also meant poring over timetables and weighing bets. If you could save an hour by going through Florence instead of Milan, but you risked being stranded for a day if the train was late, was it worth that risk? 100 years earlier, traveling around the world had meant sailing under wind power on wooden ships with no guarantees regarding either time or security. Steam and steel put a different infrastructure in place and made the world thrillingly smaller. Now it was a kind of game to plot the swiftest route across 25,000 miles, albeit a game whose safety buffer was thin enough to make the adventure real. While she was crossing the Atlantic, and not to be outdone, the Cosmopolitan newspaper of New York hired one Elizabeth Bisland to beat both Bly and Fogg. She left by land in the opposite direction, headed to San Francisco and aiming to circumnavigate the globe in the other direction. Meanwhile, Bly landed in England, then crossed to and across France. She stopped in Amiens for a cheeky but mutually admiring visit with Jules Verne, who invited her in order to snag some earned media for himself, and was disappointed she didn't cross India by land, and doubted she could do the trick in less than 79 days anyway. She proceeded then to Brindisi and Sri Lanka, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Japan. She used the developing international telegraph and undersea cable networks to send home brief updates for the paper and longer dispatches when she could get to a mailbox. The World, feeding home interest in the project, sponsored a contest, and the winner who picked the closest return time for Bly won a trip to Europe for themselves. As Phileas Fogg had experienced 17 years earlier, on paper in a book, travel through Asia was at times problematic, and when Bly left for San Francisco from Japan, she was already several days behind schedule. Bad weather delayed her ship further, causing some paper selling anxiety, but Pulitzer chartered a special train in San Francisco to spirit her across America for the final dash. As she crossed the continent, crowds gathered along the rail line and ran with the slowing train into the next station, where delegations would present her with awards and bands would play. She arrived in New York at 3:51 p.m., January 25th, 1890, to enormous crowds. Her 24,899-mile trip took 72 days and 6 hours. From the moment she left, she estimated that her average constant rate of speed had been 22.47 miles per hour. Bly set a new world's record for circumnavigating the globe. Though within months, an eccentric railroad man, the aptly named George Francis Train, snatched it back after a 67-day journey. By 1913, the travel time had been cut to an astonishing 13 days. Faced with coming up with something else to write about, she published a book called Around the World in 72 Days. Bly left journalism in 1895 to marry Robert Seaman, an industrialist 42 years her senior. She became president of his company, the Ironclad Steel Manufacturing Company, which pioneered the construction of the 55-gallon drum we know today for transporting oil and burning trash in the backyard. Bly ran the company with considerable success, filing several oil-related patents of her own, until employee embezzlements behind her back after her husband's death in 1904 brought the company into bankruptcy. Bly returned to journalism, covered the women's suffrage movement. She predicted accurately it would take until 1920 for women to get the vote. And in 1914, she sailed back to Europe as a war correspondent. After 5 years, she returned to America and died of pneumonia in New York in 1922. Her 1889 rival came up second to the very end. Elizabeth Bisland also died of pneumonia 7 years later in 1929. Both are buried in the Bronx's Woodlawn Cemetery. Try as I might, I could not find any copies of any of Nellie Bly's books for sale in the open market. However, being copyright free, they exist in multiple paperback and audiobook editions. Her life has been made into at least one movie, an episode of the PBS American Experience series, numerous children's and young adult books, and earned her a place in numerous museums, not to mention having a stamp named for her some years ago. So that's the story of how a book generated a book and, in a way, a whole career, as Nellie Bly, the enterprising journalist, picked up Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days and thought, I can do that better and faster.
Fascinating, Lynn. I find it interesting that you couldn't find any of her books, maybe coming out of the Year of the Woman 2020. There was a very large trade in women's material. Do you think they were just all scarfed up, or are they really quite that rare? Any idea?
My guess is that because they were all sort of instant books, in the sense that we now have paperbacks come out after big events, that the press runs may not have been the sort of gigantic multi-million copies we anticipate now, and the interest in them probably faded fairly quickly. So they just have gotten lost in the shuffle. I went to every big book aggregator I know and could not find any original editions. The market is choked with reprints. So her work lives on in readily accessible and very cheap copies in terms of cost. But for the collector who wanted to, to start a collection of books by women travel adventurers like Nellie Bly or Mary Kingsley, those are tough to find. And I, at this point, don't know where I would go to look for one.
Now, a lot of those type of books were published about Western, about Wild Bill Cody, and his traveling Indian show. A lot of those inexpensive, cheap paperbacks seemed to pop up in that era.
Yeah, they did. I think what was going on was mass publishing, machine-made books had come in around the Civil War, which really lowered the cost. And then the development of Book Drummers by Mark Twain to sell General Grant's memoirs created the apparatus for mass market pre-sale for publishers. And then as the rise of newspapers came along, with the ability to produce sometimes multiple editions in a day in big cities at a very low cost, they could do essentially what Dickens did with magazines 50 years earlier and serialize reports, updating and updating, as Nellie Bly did in The World, and then pack them together into a book.
Now, in your research there, Lynn, did you ever find there was a time when Nellie set foot into a hot air balloon as Phineas Fogg did? Did she ever?
I did not. I don't. I think Jules Verne tipped his hand when she stopped to see him. He was annoyed that she didn't go across India by land and stop in Bombay, especially, which is where Fogg ran into some adventures. I think he sort of imagined she was going to reenact the book, where she was simply taking the time factor and essentially going on a very long sea voyage because steam-powered iron vessels made it possible to do that in a competitive time frame. So where he probably wanted to see another flush of Around the World in 80 Days sales, she just wanted to get a good story for the World newspaper.
She got one over on him.
She did.
One last question. That seemed to be quite an era if you look back on the time when wealthy publishing companies, newspapers especially, were sponsoring these type of trips. I can't help but think of Henry Stanley being sent off in search of Dr. David Livingstone, all for the sales of newspapers. And certainly Stanley's own adventures went on to become a very well sold publication.
Yeah, and it really carried on into the middle of the 20th century, driven by advances in technology. For example, one of my favorite boyhood authors, Richard Halliburton, did a whole series of adventure travel books because there were private planes now available. And so he could go around the world to famous sites of antiquity and do outrageous things like sleep on the summit of Mount Fuji overnight, and then write books about them. So now we have people on TV who go to dangerous places around the world. And God knows we have enough reality type TV shows involving redecorating houses where they put themselves up against artificial deadlines. So I think there's something inherent in people to, if they're told somebody has done something big in this amount of time, they want to go do it faster.
Sure. And I look at some of the current billionaires like Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson or Elon Musk, all of them sponsoring adventures and discovery into the new frontier, into space discovery and financing that. But I don't know of any great cultural literature that's coming out of those efforts these days.
Not so far. I would not be surprised if that begins when the first operating base is established on the moon. And then having a base off Earth, which will, in some ways I read, reduce the cost of long distance space travel. I think that's when you'll start seeing somebody put up an interstellar version of the X Prize, and somebody will say, by damn, I am going to be the first man on Mars.
And I'm going to write a book about it. Thank you so much, Lynn. Very interesting story. I love the ones with the historical aspect. Are you going to be back with us soon? What are you thinking about sharing next?
Well, the next two I have in mind are the children's author Margaret Wise Brown, whose one famous book every parent has had to read to their kids 10,000 times. And also Lord Edward Bulwer Lytton, the famous 19th century novelist, whom Charles Schulz made immortal. But we know nothing else about him except that it was a dark and stormy night.
Well, I look forward to the Margaret Wise Brown session. I just picked this little ditty up a couple weeks ago. This is a very small children's book called Little Fur Family, and it was published in 1946, right after the war, when Harper and Brothers was trying to reinvigorate children's literature, and this was bound in rabbit fur.
Wow!
I have no idea how many little bunnies sacrificed their lives for the publication of this Margaret Wise Brown book, but I'm looking forward to that story.
Well, she was a character, and I'm looking forward to telling you about her.
All right, Lynn, we'll see you soon. Thanks a million. Okay, everybody. Our next segment is a pre-recorded session with our weekly contributor, Lee Lynn, owner of the Ridge Books in Calhoun, Georgia. This week, Lee is attending an art show. Her son is exhibiting at the show, and she's there to lend support. And wouldn't be surprised if she's there to do a little bit of one-on-one time with her grandchildren as well. What a better way to step in and be a hero. Lee and her late husband, Bob, collected outsider art for many years, and it remains a passion for Lee. Outsider art. What is that? Well, she's about to tell us. This weekend, the art show is at Paradise Gardens in Somerville, Georgia, the home and the workplace of the late Howard Finster, the famous Georgia folk artist. Bob and Lee Lynn were friends with Howard, so this weekend is a bit of a nostalgic revisit of sorts for Lee. Earlier this week, we recorded Lee sharing her thoughts and observations on collecting folk art and outsider art. Take it away. All right, one of our regular contributors, Lee Lynn from Calhoun, Georgia, was unable to be here live and in living color with us this week. She's off spending some quality time with her family, but she did want to leave behind some fun information, the folk art environment. Lee, are you there?
I'm here. I'm here, Ed.
Lee.
Hi there.
Are you going to talk to us about folk art in Georgia or something a little bit more national?
National. And the reason I'm not here is because I'm actually in a folk art environment this afternoon. Howard Finster's Paradise Garden in Somerville, Georgia, where my son is participating in an art show over there. And so I'm actually in a folk art environment today.
Good. What exactly is folk art, Lee?
Well, folk art...
What distinguishes it? What defines it?
Generally speaking, it's outside the mainstream, frequently untrained artists who kind of march to of course, most artists march to their own drummer, but naive, primitive paintings frequently, sometimes otherworldly looking, it goes by a number of names: outsider artists, visionary artists, self-taught artists. Though in recent years, I think some of the people who consider themselves folk artists may have more training than earlier ones.
Is there a peak period? Was there an era or a time when folk art was dominant?
Well,
when it first began through the present, perhaps?
Well, the original folk art was things like itinerant painters painting portraits in colonial times, or people who designed weather vanes or stone pottery for use in the household. Those people were folk artists, original folk artists. Mm-hmm. The term nowadays applies more to, say, a painter who paints memory paintings of things when he was a child or she was a child, a baptism in a country church, picking apples in an orchard. Grandma Moses was in many ways a folk artist, but lately in the last 20, 30 years has really been a heyday for this type of art. There are big art shows. There are many dealers who specialize in this. There are, you know, TV shows about these artists. It's a big deal these days. It's a big deal, and it's a lot of fun. The first.
Well, dive in and tell us more.
Okay.
I understand you've got some graphics to share with us.
Oh,
so
yes, we do.
The
We
stage
do.
is yours.
Okay, we'll get to the graphics in just a minute. Frequently, these artists create their own world. They want to share it with other people. And they could be termed visionary, not because they are ahead of their time or because they have a vision for the future, but because they literally say they have had visions. For example, Howard Finster, who is probably my favorite folk artist because it's someone that I knew, worked repairing bikes and would get fingerprints of paint on parts of the bicycle. And one day there were faces on these little fingerprints telling him, as he said, to do sacred art. And from this, Finster, who was a preacher, who made clocks that he sold, or clock cases that he sold at trade days around Northwest Georgia and Alabama, who repaired bicycles, who repaired radios, who did all kinds of things, became pretty much a full-time artist. And he, or some may have visions. Was a man in Kansas, M.T. Leggett, whose art commented on current affairs and politics, that he felt compelled to do caricatures of political figures, and that was part of his art world. Eddie Owens Martin, also known as Saint Ohm or Saint EOM, had visions of three travelers from the future who told him that he was now to be known as Saint Ohm, and that he was a Passaquanian and was to build a place in Georgia called Passaquan, which he did do. And we're going to talk about a really beautiful book about Passaquan. They may share their worlds in public, or they may be very private about them. Some artists' art is a means of lessening grief after the death of a loved one, as L.V. Hull in Kosciuszko, Mississippi did. There is a place in Homestead, Florida, the Carl Castle. The creator of it, no one ever saw him working, and the rumors were that he had extraterrestrial or psychic help in creating the Carl Castle. And so there's a wide variety of these worlds around the country, around the world, actually. A lot of them in France. There are a good many French artists who have created these environments. But let's see, right now, we're going to take a little look at some of them around the country. Now, these are all places that I have been to. This is in Brownsville, Tennessee. It's Billy Tripp's Minefield Cemetery. And in addition to all of these signs and small constructions, he built enormous metal towers and managed to get this water tower. His constructions are next to a little strip mall just right in the middle of town. This is another view. You can see the strip mall in the background. This is in Lucas, Kansas, which is a town that is completely devoted to folk art and outsider art. And this is the Garden of Eden that was built by S.T. Dinsmore. Was his home. And here we have Adam and Eve and the snake. And many of his constructions are concrete, towering concrete constructions. This is a roadside at an intersection in Hanksville, Utah. And he actually charged $0.25 to walk around. He had a collection box out there. And we went there a couple of times. And the second time, we were really tempted to put $25 or $30 in the box and take home a piece of this stuff that was just lying around. I've always been kind of sorry that we didn't. This is actually an artist's studio near Fayetteville, Arkansas, in the Brooklyn Mountains, called Terra Studios. But their artwork is really strange figures like this, little cars running around on a little road, and lots and lots and lots of trolls, most of them naked and a lot of them blue. But it has been closed due to COVID, but it's a really fun place to go and visit, especially with children. This is another view from Lucas, Kansas. Everything in the town is devoted to folk art. This is in Georgia. This is up near Hollywood, Georgia, and it's an artist named Sam Granger, and this is Sam G. Land. And he has been featured in Atlanta publications fairly recently, and does a lot of interesting things. I have one of his pictures, and this is Mr. Leggett in Mullinville, Kansas, and a lot of these figures along the highway have political and cult and current event relationships. Now he's been gone for several years, but he was a really nice guy. We bought a couple of paintings from him. He was featured on American Pickers at one time, but I'm not sure what's happened since his death. But I hope the people of Mullinville have kept this. Because it was wonderful. It was just wonderful. This is L.V. Hull of Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Her son died, and she turned to art and filled her front yard with her constructions. She painted a lot of shoes and hung them on things too. And she took items like, I have an old computer monitor that she painted and decorated with beads and things. And inside her house, which was spotless, but there were paths between art, so that there would be a table that was covered in pieces that she had decorated. And there was a path like to her kitchen and a path to her bedroom, but extremely tidy, considering. And she was featured in the Kosciuszko Welcome Center, which is how we found out about her. And the lady there said, "Oh, just go see her. She loves to have company." And when we pulled up, she was out the door before we could even get out of the car, and went back a couple of other times. And she was just a delightful person. This is Carl Castle in Homestead, Florida, with visitors, and it is still open. Well, it's not open right now, but it is still open today. So that's the end of those. So we can go back to studio. And now, any art seems to beget lots and lots of books. And this is certainly true of this type of art. And I want to show you a few that are specifically about some of these artist worlds. And so now we have to, I'm going to close this one. There we go. Now I can get to the other one. Let's see if this works. Okay. This is a book about St. Omer and Passaquan. It was written in the late 80s, and it is in his words to a large extent. He was interviewed by Tom Patterson, and Patterson has written a number of books on art. Some of the pictures in here are by Roger Manley, who has also done a good bit of research, and Manley has done some of the Weird State books, has been the author of some of those. This is the cover. This is the outside of the slipcase. I guess you'd call it a slipcase. It's really a fold-over case with these little bone clasps on the edges. And this is the actual book. This is really a beautiful example of book art. This is a picture of St. Omer in Passaquan regalia, which looks very Indian, very Native American to me. And here, this is back, when he was still alive, and when the garden, when the environment was kept up. After his death by suicide in 1986, it really fell apart, and it was due to the efforts of the Columbus State University and the Kohler Foundation, and a local foundation, the Passaquan Preservation Society, that it has been restored and opened back to the public a few years ago. It's only open on the weekends, but you can now go and see it. And I meant to wear. He made beads, paper and wooden beads to sell, made necklaces to sell at Passaquan, and I have one of those necklaces. I'm not sure whether the beads are actually done by him or not, but Passaquan folks do some art shows, and I have beads and a coloring book from there, so I can actually color some of his art. This is the book itself in with the case. Really a nice presentation, and these are two of his drawings that hang on my walls. You can see his signature right there. This one is actually signed on the back, and again we have this ethnic or native sort of looking things. This looks more African than Native American, but this is typical of some of his work, though the ink drawings are not necessarily so typical. Okay, then Howard Finster's Paradise Garden is Finster was one of the earliest that started this heyday of folk art, and this is a book by his daughter Thelma, and in it does have a lot of pictures of early items. This snake, this mound of snakes, it may be one of the pieces that's now at the High Museum in Atlanta. The exhibit from the garden at the High is kind of strange to me because there's no dirt, there are no vines, there are no chickens walking around, there are no bugs. It looks kind of out of place. But here is a pile of old TV sets, some of the junk that he used to produce some of his art. Now, Howard didn't just share his art through his garden. He wrote his own books. And when I say he wrote his own books, he actually hand wrote the books. This was one of his books, Howard Finster, Man of Visions. And in it is a picture of my husband. In the 80s, we spent a good bit of time at Paradise Garden, and Howard would come to Calhoun and talk to Bob's English classes, and we got to know him pretty well. And we're not sure why that picture is where it is or anything like that. This was a church a block or so away from his house. He managed to acquire most of about a 4-block area around his house. And this was a church that he turned into what he called the world's folk art church. And it kind of has a wedding cake look to it. And in the last couple of years, the Garden Foundation has received a grant to restore that building, and it desperately needed restoring. He actually invited Bob to climb to the top of it when he was working on it, and Bob refused to set foot on the ladder. But you can see this is how he wrote his books. And it is very hard to follow. This one especially is mostly photos of people he knew or people he worked with or people who supported his work and comments about them. However, this was the first self-published book that he did. Howard Finster's Vision of 1982, Vision of 200 light years away, space born of 3 generations from Earth to the heaven of heavens. And I want to tell you what he says about this book. He said that it is an account of space travel. You have to read it to understand. It is a visionary sermon and work of art. Some of the pages, there are interlinear notations, which Finster said were there so people could read between the lines. It's a very difficult book to read if you wanted to read it, but it is an introduction both to the art of Howard Finster and to the mind of Howard Finster. He had already been discovered when this book was written and was kind of on the verge of worldwide fame. And copies of it are fairly hard to come by. It's not the only book like this that he did, but was his first one. This is a pile of mostly bicycle parts and TVs. He said that he took junk that people threw away and made it into art, and this is one of his stockpiles of artistic material. This is the folk art church. This picture is several years old, and you can tell that it's not in great shape. The original paths in the garden were all concrete inset with junk, all sorts of junk. They looked kind of like this. This is a wall, but the pathways were similar to that. And the foundation, for ease of getting around the garden and safety purposes, have done a lot of smooth concrete paths. And this is some more of the garden after it has been cleaned up. It's a lot of fun to go to. It's a lot of fun for kids. And it's interesting when you've been going there for 40 years to see changes that have been made. But the good thing is that it is now being taken care of. Of course, his family, and this is my favorite all-time picture. This is Howard out in front of his workshop, and this is my son Will when he was about 2. And we were over there visiting one day, and they both sat on the ground and waved at the camera, and we took his picture. It's rather grainy. It's an old picture, but Will has an enlargement of it that he displays when he does art shows. And he was influenced, to an extent by Howard, though he has had a little training and has his own style. But this is this building at one time was Howard's workshop. I showed you earlier the picture of the Garden of Eden in Lucas, Kansas. This was a little booklet that Mr. Dinsmore produced to sell when there were tours of the home itself. I don't think it's open to the public now, but copies of this, you can still find, on various search sites. Raw Vision magazine, which is Outsider Art Brut. It's an international magazine that's based in Chicago. Frequently has articles on art environments. And in this issue, which was last summer, Nellie Mae Rowe, who was a Georgia artist, was featured. And this is a picture of the outside of her home. This was a small environment, nothing like the acres of Paradise Gardens or Passaquan. This is an interesting book. The title is great, Self-Made Worlds, Visionary Folk Art Environments, because that's exactly what they are. And it features a lot of lesser known ones. And I don't have a copy. I've sold the only copy that I had, but it is a very interesting book and a good one for, someone who's interested in the environments and wants to find something new to go see. And the Weird USA and the Weird States guides are great sources to find out about local, lesser known environments, though they do feature famous ones like the Watts Towers, which is probably the outstanding art environment. And it survived the Watts riots and is, just a wonderful, amazing. The Simon Rodia, who built it, did it by himself, and I don't think he had extraterrestrial or psychic help, like the Carl Castle, but it is an amazing work of art, and is now a state park, so it's being taken care of. And this, Alan and I were talking about these folks yesterday. This is by a painting by Harold Newton, who was one of the Florida Highwaymen, a group of African-American men who some of them had a little bit of training, but who painted primarily landscape scenes, sold them along the highways from the trunks of their cars, I think beginning in the 40s, and their paintings bring a pretty price today. But this is one of those paintings, and if you ever had a chance to buy one, you certainly should. So if you have a chance to visit some of these environments, do. it's fun. Take a picnic, take your kids. It's a chance sometimes to meet the artist or to meet their descendants or to participate in the preservation of some of these places. For example, the show at Paradise Gardens today is a fundraiser for preservation of the garden, and also a way for artists who have not been doing shows the last year, to show some of their pieces. And be sure to take $25, $30 with you. And if you see something you like, buy it, and buy it right then, because the prices will go up.
Are those blue troglodytes for sale?
They were not. They were. I did buy a face jug there that's with the raku process that makes it kind of scaly looking and crackly looking, and I did buy that there, and it is it's blue, but the trolls were not for sale. But you could take courses there and participate in doing some of those pieces, that were on display there at the studio. But mostly what they sold they did a lot of little bluebirds and stuff like that, but the face
The
jugs
art
were nice.
is great, but I have to say that the Finster handwritten books were my favorite.
They are wonderful. They are wonderful. The other one, this one is signed. These are being saved for my children. They have a copy each of these books. But Howard was a delightful man and a very sweet person. And he would stay up all night painting, and he numbered all his paintings. Later years, his family did as much of the work as he did. And so when you're buying a Finster, you need to buy a low number, like below 3,000 or 4,000, because it numbers in the tens of thousands. Mm-hmm. But he's what got us started on 40 years of collecting folk and outside of art.
Thank you, Lee. That's a fabulous tour of folk art across the country. I'm sure there's more. I'm going to start looking around my neck of the woods and see what we have up here.
You should. I haven't been there, so I'm not sure what there is, but I'm sure there is something.
All right, real time, Lee. It's now Saturday afternoon. You're probably enjoying yourself with your family, and I hope you are, and we'll see you next weekend.
Okay, great.
All right, keep smiling. Earlier in the show, we had a little glitch. We were unable to play our piece from David Hess of Orange Bookstore, and we're going to get that lined up and give it another shot here momentarily. But before we do, I would like to just give a quick editorial. My name is Ed Markowitz, so therefore I can give an editorial. I guess this is called an Ed editorial. Here at the Rare Book Cafe, the book lovers rendezvous, we bring you all kinds of subjects in the book ecosystem. It's like a big Venn diagram, but right in the middle is the book, and more often than not, the rare book. Last week, we brought you Daniel Weinberg from the old Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago to talk about autographs. We bring you Mary Kay Watson to talk about illustrations. This week, Lee Lin was talking about outsider art. Lin was talking to us about travel, world travel, and the historical people who made it. And then the big covering of that is the book fairs, whether they're virtual book fairs or live book fairs. All parts of the book world we try to bring to you, because all parts of the book world are so interesting and so interconnected. And every week here on the show, we like to bring you a new aspect with familiar old faces, and we're glad to have you. We've got one more session coming up, David Hess with Things Found in Books. And once that's over, I'm going to give you the answer to this week's trivia question. What is the oldest book fair in the world? Where is it held? That answer coming right up.
Hello, this is David from the Bookman in Orange, California, welcoming you to my segment today of Things Found in Used Books. And let's get started right away. I got some interesting stuff today. I want to cover it all. And we'll start off today with something that in this Anita Luce book. It's a little document that was apparently sent to postal customers in I believe it was 1968, because that's when the 6-cent stamp was in use. And it says, "Dear postal patron, number one, all Christmas cards will require 6 cents postage this year, sealed or unsealed." I'm not sure what unsealed means. Number two, cards may be sealed and contain a written message. Okay. Use zip codes in both the address and your return address. The local and out-of-town labels speed the movement and dispatch of your mail. Number five, mail early in December and early in the day. Now, it's not that interesting to look at, and it's not that ground-shattering of an item, but I thought, to me, it's interesting because it's a little window on to the way we did stuff, back then in the 60s, when things weren't quite as cut and dry, and you would get something like this in the mail telling you how to send a Christmas card, and I found it interesting, and I thought I'd share it with you, and that's that one. Next, in this little Rex Beach book, Rainbow's End, I found this advertisement for fruit ranching in British Columbia. It's actually a book that they're advertising. And this is the advertisement for the second edition of this book. So it's already gone through the first, and we're ready to get into the second edition of Fruit Ranching in British Columbia for $1.50. And I'm not sure exactly when this came out, but it's probably from the turn of the century, the 20s, 1919s. Anyway, so make sure to get your copy now. I'm sure it's in a much larger edition today. So I like that. Fruit ranching in British Columbia. It's pretty specific. Now this manual here it's the Marine's Handbook. And this Marine's Handbook was published in 1940. It's full of fascinating stuff about how to handle a gun, how to fix wounds, what happens when someone goes into shock, all kinds of military type stuff, including how to work a submachine gun and rifles. But within this book, I found a number of things. I found 3 different articles or newspaper clippings on wounded soldiers. Now, none of them passed away at this point, but they were all wounded. One was wounded in Germany in 1945. The other guy was wounded in Tarawa. And this gentleman here, it says that the High Point Marine nearly lost his smile on Iwo Jima. And the article goes on to say how he was a happy-go-lucky guy before he went to the war, but he's not so easy to smile nowadays. And so they're kind of again a little window onto of the way things were during the World War II era with our newspapers and articles on the folks. It's kind of sobering. Within the same book, I found this daily flight information form. Now you fill this out before you go take your plane out, and it tells you what kind of plane, the model V-54B4-250. And the place was the NATTC, which is I think an air station in Pensacola, Florida. And it's dated June 1st, 1943. And so it has a whole list of things on it for you to write a comment on or check off or whatever. And Number 1, it's inspect blades for pits, cracks, nicks, and proper oil film. And someone has written no oil. Okay. Check spark plug terminal assemblies for cleanliness and tightness. And it says dirty. Inspect tires for defects and proper inflation. And it says cracks. So this plane didn't sound like it was going to go up right away. It didn't sound very good at all, actually. I don't think I would want to fly it. So they had some work to do on this particular plane. And it goes on. There's a whole checklist here. And I found that very interesting. Again, 1943, June 1st. So, and finally, I found this rather fascinating item in this book called The Movies. And it's a big tome, relatively common book. Usually I get it in dust jacket, but this time it had no dust jacket. It's a little worse for wear, cracked hinges and stuff. And I was kind of like thumbing through it, and I found a couple things that I thought was relatively interesting, very interesting. One is this giant postcard. And what it is, it's the world famous forecourt of the Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood, California. So this postcard, I believe, is from 1966. And in it, you can see some of the stars, Don Amici, Norma Shear, Eddie Cantor, Henry Fonda. Anyway, so it has a lot of the stars there. And I guess that's still there. I live out here and I've never been to the Grauman's Chinese Theater, so I don't know. But I found that interesting. And most interesting of all was this envelope. It's stuck in there. It says Clark and High, H-Y, High, Clark and High. And I pulled it out. And the picture of Clark Gable and High. Now, I don't know who High is. I looked it up. I did a little research. I couldn't find anything on High. On the back, it says Clark Gable and High at Chasen's in Beverly Hills, November 1954. And down at the bottom, it says, to my dearest Peggy, with love always from High. So High gave this picture to Peggy of her and Clark Gable at Chasen's, 1954. Now that is cool. That's a cool little item. And you can tell it's kind of again, I stress these aren't professional photographs. You can tell, but just the lighting and the posing and stuff. It's just a snapshot someone took of Clark and High. And I want to thank you for allowing me to speak to you today, and I hope you tune in next week. We'll do it all over again. I've already got some great stuff for next week. And if you have something that you would like to share with the program, please just send me a picture and a little blurb about what you found to oldbook@ebookman.com. That's oldbook, no S, oldbook@ebookman.com. And I'd be more than happy to bring it along and share it with the rest of the audience. And in the meantime, I want to thank you for stopping by, and I will see you next week.
Welcome back. Thank you, David. If you are on Instagram, I certainly encourage you to follow @BookmanOrange. @BookmanOrange. That's David's Instagram handle. One of these days, I'm going to ask David to do a segment on t-shirts. He's got some great books on his Instagram page, but he's also got wonderful customers wearing some very peculiar and interesting t-shirts. We should maybe do that one someday. All right, folks, the oldest book fair in the world is the Frankfurt Book Fair. The answer to our question this week, the Frankfurt Book Fair reportedly been around since the 15th century. Henry VIII is said to have sent an emissary to buy books for his new library at Oxford University. So I guess they were one of the first institutional purchases booksellers love so much. Okay, that's it. That's the answer to our show. We're coming up on the end. Next week, we've got Mary Kay Watson. She's back with part 2 of her segment, concluding of the grisly West Virginia murder case that was the basis of the horror movie Night of the Hunter. Lee Lin will be back with an interview with 86-year-old writer. Gosh, I hope I'm still vertical at 86. 86-year-old writer Minion Ballard, author of the very collectible Miss Dimple Mysteries. Well, that's about it. I think I've gotten it all so far. We're going to close up our show. See you next week. Thanks for joining us at the Rare Book Cafe, the book lovers' rendezvous, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. Thank you, everybody.